I shaved. I cut my beard off. I no longer have a beard. What is up, guys? So today we are going to be taking another deep dive look at a Pokemon that we've already looked at before, and probably any cup that this Pokemon is going to be allowed in is pretty much going to be a really strong contender. Let's go ahead and get a look into our Pokemon today, which is actually Lapras. So Lapras is a water and ice type Pokemon at level 40 with 15 IVs across the board. You can hit 2641, so very respectable CP there. You can achieve a 1498 here at level 22 with a 0 attack, 10 defense, and 14 stamina IV spread there. Now, according to my spreadsheets and all the math that I have done, technically Lapras is 8th, but that accounts for Giratina and it also accounts for Probopass. So at the time of recording, technically we are 6th in bulk. And again here we are 6th, but that's including Probopass being in there. So we're technically 5th whenever it comes to stat product inside of the Kingdom Cup here. So being that we've already looked at Lapras last month for the Tempest Cup, this month is kind of a little different. It's not like super different, but there's a couple of different talking points. But going on to our moves, which is actually one of the different points here. Last month, I totally discounted Dragon Pulse here. Yes, last month I said Dragon Breath. It was an accident. Being said, this month we do have Dragon types actually in our cup. Dragon Pulse does have a little bit of functionality this month, but let's get into that once we go through all our moves here. So getting into our moves here, we do have on our fast moves, Frost Breath, Ice Shard, and Water Gun. Ice Shard being our legacy move here. So out of these three moves, the one that I found the most effective this month was actually Water Gun. So Ice Shard here is objectively a better move. Better energy for the same damage, no problem there. The problem is, one, it's legacy. So if you don't have it, you're pretty much just SOL on that. But Water Gun actually does a really good job this month going up against a lot of the fire types, a lot of the ground types that are kind of in the meta, but not really. Like, they're just kind of there because they have a dual type situation. Either way, Water Gun does really good coverage this month. A little bit better than Ice Shard in my personal opinion. And whenever I chose a moveset, Water Gun was the fast move that I ended up going with. Moving on to our charge moves, so we do have Dragon Pulse, Ice Beam, Blizzard, Hydro Pump, and Surf. So Dragon Pulse and Ice Beam here are our two legacy moves. Dragon Pulse does have quite a bit of utility in this cup. Ice Beam also has quite a bit of utility. And when you compare the two, I personally went with Ice Beam. So here's the reason why. Is Ice Beam ends up hitting dragons super effective, just like Dragon Pulse would. But Ice Beam costs 5 less energy for the same amount of damage, so you end up getting a better ratio at the end of it. So Ice Beam just, personally, it just does just inch out above Dragon Pulse. Dragon Pulse, very good honorable mention. I would not get rid of that move. If you already have it, don't try to get rid of it. If you have Ice Beam though, I definitely do personally prefer that one. So let's actually just go through all these charge moves here. So we have Dragon Pulse costing 60 for 90 damage with a 1.5 ratio. Ice Beam costing 55 for 90 damage with a 1.64 ratio. Blizzard costing 75 for 130, doing a 1.73 ratio there. Hydro Pump costing 75 for 130 with a 1.73 ratio as well. And last but not least, we actually have Surf for 40 energy, doing 65 damage at a 1.63 ratio. So whenever it comes to which moveset I personally went with, I really like Water Gun, Ice Beam, and Surf. That's just the Lapras that if I could choose, I would personally build that Lapras. Now, I do not have a Legacy Lapras, so the Lapras that I may end up using if I decide to use Lapras will definitely have Water Gun and Surf. I do think those are the two most important moves. And if I had Ice Beam, I'd definitely go with that. But because I don't, I will be going with Blizzard for myself personally. Let's actually move into a little bit of a shield situation type thing here. So in the scenario where I have no shields and my opponent has no shields, how well do I end up doing? So this scenario is really just in particular for those last minute, just I have no shields, my opponent has no shields, this is our last Pokemon. Let's see how like down to the nitty gritty we get and how good we do. Well, Lapras ends up winning 82.1% of the matches. Now that's pretty freaking huge, considering I think that's the biggest number we've seen outside of maybe the two kings of the meta. So, moving on to our next scenario, 2 shields that I have versus 0 shields that my opponent has. So the reason that we run this is to actually figure out which Pokemon we just absolutely cannot beat. So, doesn't matter how many shields we have, they're just going to beat us down. There's only one Pokemon. So coming in at 98.7% wins, there's only one Pokemon that even beats us, and that's actually Abomasnow, which is crazy to think about because Abomasnow just basically has Razor Leaf. Like, that's the only thing that he really has going for him. He can get to Outrage and he can use it. He also has, what, Blizzard or something that he can also get to, and he can technically use those. Outrage would probably do better against Lapras, considering that we're going to be resisting the ice because of our own ice typing here. But either way, Abomasnow is the only Pokemon that we really have issues with, and considering that Abomasnow isn't going to be utilized nearly as much this month as it was in the Tempest Cup, I think that's a pretty safe thing that we can say that we're not going to go up against. Next scenario is where I have 0 shields and my opponent has 2 shields. So the reason that we run this scenario is to figure out which Pokemon we just straight up win against so that we can figure out what kind of like hard counter we are for. So actually, we end up winning against several Pokemon here. Camerupt, Articuno, Dugong, Houndoom, and Arcanine all end up falling to a Lapras, even though they have 2 shields to utilize, which is very interesting. Last but not least here, in a situation where I have 2 shields and my opponent has 2 shields, kind of like as if we were leading with this Pokemon, how many matches will we end up winning? We actually end up winning 84.6% of those matchups. So it's crazy because I was just talking literally like minutes ago, even though it was yesterday for you guys. I was literally just talking about how Arcanine, I really wish that his no shields versus all shields, whether he has no shields and your opponent has no shields, versus 2 shields versus 2 shields, I really wish that either one of those numbers would have been skewed higher and we would have been able to talk differences here because he could at least been either a good closer or a good opener. And then Lapras is the complete opposite. Lapras just blows everybody out of the water. Literally, Lapras is great. I mean, shield-wise, perfect. I love it. Now, moving on to our section where we actually go up against some matches here. So every deep dive, I try to take the subject Pokemon and I put them up against the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon in the cup just to see how well they end up doing. Now, Lapras has a really cool set of matches here. So, losses. Technically, we have 3 losses. Now, depending on which moveset you go with Lapras, you do end up having a situation where you lose to yourself. The moveset that I choose, being Water Gun, Ice Beam, and Surf, you actually will lose to a Lapras if it comes in with Dragon Pulse. Having Dragon Pulse means that it can do neutral damage to you as Lapras and end up winning. Other than that, we actually end up losing to Bastiodon and Registeel. But that's it. Very cool that we only end up losing 2-3 Pokemon there. Now, as far as what we win against, we actually end up winning against Regice, Steelix, Dugong, Altaria, Skarmory, Torkoal, and Forretress. Holy cow, that's a ton. So I really think that Water Gun here is what carries us through a lot of these matches. The fact that we can end up doing a ton of neutral damage with Water Gun, and the fact that we have this super fast charging move here from Surf, we can just charge and fire really, really quickly. I think that it really sets up Lapras to be a really tanky shield buster. And that's very rare. It's really, really cool to see Lapras work this way. Next, as far as counters go, so what are we actually good against and what are we actually going to be just hardcore countered by? So let's actually go over the hardcore counters. So things that are steel type, things that have steel type moves in general though, like Bastiodon, Registeel, and Bronzong all end up doing really, really well up against Lapras. And also the other water-type Pokemon also do really well against us. Things like Kingdra and Celio really give us a hard time as Lapras. But now, what do we really do good at? Well, when you consider fire Pokemon, you actually have Arcanine and all of the fire starters, whether you're talking Charmeleon, Monferno, Infernape, Blaziken, doesn't matter. All of the fire starters end up losing to Lapras. The only one that comes close is Typhlosion. Next thing that we actually do really good up against are the dragons. So this one was where I really started to consider Dragon Pulse versus Ice Beam. Dragon Pulse does really well, but I think Ice Beam ends up just devastating a lot more. Considering that it costs less, you can get to it just that much faster, and the fact that you can just hit the dragon types for super effective damage, plus you end up hitting the flying types for super effective damage, you end up doing a lot more with Ice Beam rather than Dragon Pulse. But you definitely should not discount Dragon Pulse at all. So the dragons like Altaria, Dragonair, and Salamence all fall really hard due to our Ice Beam here. And then lastly, ice types, things like Glalie, Castform, and Dugong all end up having a really hard time coming over a Lapras. Now, last but not least, let's actually look at some positives and some negatives for our Lapras here. So, as far as negatives go, I only have one. And the only one that I have is that it can't beat either of the kings. So, it can't beat Bastiodon and it can't beat Lucario. Now, that's straight up like no shields. I'm sure if it had complete shield advantage, it ends up winning against both of those. But I'm talking like even playing field, just both shields, normal, all that good stuff. It has a really hard time taking out the kings. So I've heard that some people consider Lapras the third king of the cup. And I can dig that. I can get into that. So we can start saying that the three kings. We can start taking Lapras into a lot of our matchup encounters and trying to figure out, can it beat Bastiodon, Lapras, and Lucario? I want to know, can it beat all of them? So we'll start doing that in the near future. So that being the only negative, let's actually move into our positives here. So our positives are kind of the similar scenarios as last month. I mean, we just have a huge amount of bulk, and I love it. I love Lapras for how much bulk that it has. It just ends up making a really great PvP Pokemon in general. And our next and only other positive is that just Lapras's shield usage is amazing. Considering the situation where even when we have 2 shields versus 2 shields, we end up only dropping 2.5% of our matchups whenever we don't have any shields. That's crazy. The actual shield usage of Lapras is so good. There's so many Pokemon that you don't need to use shields on. There's so many Pokemon that even without shields, you have just a huge advantage on them. Lapras is a definite pick for me. I definitely want to use Lapras on my team this month. I haven't found another Pokemon outside of the 2 other kings that I really just have to have. And I think Lapras is one of those for me. I definitely want to use Lapras on my team. I think that it's just so good. I love it. It's got everything that I want. Unfortunately, since I don't have Ice Beam, I will be using the slower Blizzard here, but I could actually end up converting to Frost Breath for my personal Lapras just to have some extra ice coverage, but I don't know how good that would end up faring. Probably not as much. I would probably stick with the Water Gun and just forfeit the Ice Beam for the Blizzard here. But, you know, So that's just my take on Lapras, guys. I'd love to hear your opinions on him down below. And of course, if you guys are still looking for a deep dive Pokemon to be completed, I promise I'm getting through these. I'm getting more comments now than ever, but I'm going to get to them. I'm slowly working through them. Today, I just got done recording Arcanine. You guys saw it yesterday. I'm doing Lapras now, and I'm going to turn around and end up doing Fortress, I think, tomorrow. Don't hold me to that, double check, but Fortress definitely coming up very soon. I think Fortress and Torkoal are the two that are tied. One or the other will be tomorrow, I promise. So, again, that is actually it that I have for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys like to like videos, make sure you do that. If you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in those comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.